This challenge is pretty self-explanatory. For every boss, I will use a randomly chosen weapon class, and of course, I can only use each weapon class once. In Demon Souls, there are 18 bosses, and as luck would have it, exactly 18 weapon classes, and that's without including shields. In order to get a random weapon class, I'll use a random number generator website and spin a wheel after I defeat each boss. Plus, after beating a boss, I must unequip the weapon I'm using, as I'll no longer be using that weapon class for the rest of the playthrough for any reason at all. I'm only allowed to use one weapon class at a time, so for example, even if the wheel hasn't landed on talismans, I may not equip a talisman to heal myself. I also won't use any shields in this run because I don't really need to, but this is more of a personal preference. If you try this challenge yourself, you could argue that since shields aren't on the wheel at all, they can be considered freebies to use alongside your randomly chosen weapon class. If the wheel lands on a weapon class that I don't currently have, I'll be forced to go through the game with my fists until I find a weapon in that class. Other than that, there aren't really any other rules or restrictions. It's a pretty simple challenge, and as always, just as a disclaimer, I will allow duping, but only in certain situations to save time, such as meeting weapon requirements or getting upgrade materials for weapons, and in the case of the latter, I will only do so when I've reached the point in the game where said materials can be farmed. With that being covered, I'd say it's time to get on with the challenge. Let's see what our first weapon class will be. This time, the wheel has chosen hammers. This gives us a couple of choices for a starting class. We could choose the Barbarian for the club, or the Priest for the mace. This time I chose the Priest, since they also start out with some armor and a free talisman. Though I do feel like the Vanguard will still one-shot us whether we have on armor or not. I did die to this once and had to restart with a new character, but thankfully, right before this run, I fought the Asylum Demon with only fists, and for the most part, these two share a moveset, so the same rules for avoiding its attacks should apply. As with the Asylum Demon, most attacks will miss as long as you stay behind the Vanguard at all times, but this can be a little tricky to do in a small arena, so make sure to leave enough space between yourself, the Vanguard, and the wall. This guy's way tankier than the Asylum Demon, but as long as you stay patient and keep an eye on his axe, you'll beat him in no time. As you saw in the intro, beating him unlocks a bonus area where you can collect a couple extra items before meeting an unavoidable demise at the hands of the Dragon God. From here, the game will proceed as normal, and we can go ahead and spin for our next weapon. After a couple spins, it finally lands on something that is currently obtainable in the first part of the game, and that is polearms. There is only one weapon of this category that we can get in 1-1, and it's not going to be lying on the ground for free, we're gonna have to work for it. The halberd can only be dropped by the Boletarian soldiers wielding it. In 1-1, there are only 2 of them, so it's highly unlikely that we'll come across the drop during our natural level progression. Also, the drop rate is really low. There's only a 0.5% chance of getting it at all, which is pretty brutal for such a basic weapon. At first, I thought starting out as a priest would be better with less points wasted in luck, but I'm quickly starting to regret that decision. To prepare for farming, I'll vault over to Ostrava and get the Thief's Ring to avoid that one blue-eyed knight in the way, then I'll give the jade hair ornament to Thomas for the Ring of Herculean Strength, in case I get overwhelmed with carrying all the grass I'll get from farming. Normally, getting a single drop isn't that bad even if the drop rate is super low, but what I didn't take into account is that in the other games, the base item discovery is much higher, and there's also multiple items to increase drop rate. We can't increase our drop rate until we beat the Phalanx, and I'll be honest with you, at some point I got so frustrated that I considered restarting the run entirely so I wouldn't have to farm for this. But at that point, I was too far in and had to commit. Turning back now would mean the time I already spent doing this was for nothing. In total, it took around 8 hours to get a single halberd, which is double the time it took to get 30 sunlight medals in my DS3 no FP recovery run. This wasn't all in one sitting for the sake of preserving my sanity, but in the time that it took to farm this, I probably could have been done with the entire run. While I was doing that, Ostrava was fighting in the background and ended up getting himself killed by some basic enemies. But anyways, Now that I'm finally done with one of the worst farming sessions of my life, it comes as no surprise that the priest class lacks the dexterity to wield the halberd, so it'll be worse than our fists. At the very least, we can apply turpentine to circumvent the damage issue, but the deflection is still going to be very annoying and leave us even more vulnerable to the hoplite's barrage of spears. Nonetheless, the phalanx isn't super hard to deal with, even at a disadvantage, and after the fight, I'll definitely be increasing my dexterity to patch up that weakness. Now then, it's time to give the wheel another spin. Our next weapon class is fists. Well, fist weapons to be exact. There aren't many of these in the game, but 2 of the 3 can be accessed without killing any bosses or important NPCs. The first one is the Claw in 3-1. I used a few of the soul items I got after the Vanguard to get my dexterity to 14 so I can wield it. Fist weapons are not dual-wielded by default, and in order to have a weapon on each hand, you need to have 2 separate fist weapons, or 2 copies of the same one. The second weapon I want is the Iron Knuckles dropped by the Scale Miners in 2-1. All bare-fisted miners will drop this weapon, and since there is an abundance of them, it will be much quicker to farm this as opposed to the halberd, plus it also has a higher drop rate. In order to avoid another painfully dragged out farming session, I decided to upgrade my luck just a tad to see if it makes any difference. Typically I don't bother with luck because item drops are kind of weird in this game with the whole world tendency gimmick skewing them in a certain direction as well, but I figured I had nothing to lose. I also died in body form a couple of times, which shifted the world tendency towards black, completely intentionally. And I don't know if this was a placebo, but I got something to drop the moment I upgraded luck. Of course it was just some upgrade materials. But it didn't take very long to get the Iron Knuckles to drop, and I'd like to think that upgrading my luck contributed to that and it wasn't a total waste of levels. For now, I'll get both weapons to +4 and then head towards our next destination. The first Archstone I want to complete is the Shrine of Storms. That way we can get Storm King out of the way as soon as we can, since there's just a handful of weapon classes that work against that boss. We'll beat Storm King with the first eligible weapon class the wheel lands on. That way we won't have to worry about saving any weapon classes or spinning multiple times and can just have it done. While I'm here, I'll take out the second Vanguard so we can get a feel for our new Iron Knuckles. As advertised, they have very short range, even when compared to other fist weapons like our Claw for example. But it's still pretty fun to combo the knuckles into the claws, and we can even alternate which hand holds which depending on the situation. The Iron Knuckle can be helpful for dealing with the skeleton enemies who are weaker to blunt damage, while the bleed inflicted by the Claw is useful for those fleshy enemies like the Vanguard. The Adjudicator is also fleshy, but not susceptible to bleed unfortunately. However, his physical defenses overall are very low, so both of our weapons will be able to put out some decent damage here. We get a lot of souls for such a simple boss fight, and for now, I'll use them to level Vitality to 20. Before we continue to the old hero, we can't forget to spin the wheel for our next weapon class. Talismans, oh no, that's some pretty rotten luck honestly. I've already established that I'm going to fight the old hero next, so I can't back out now, but it's not going to be a very exciting fight. As you probably know, the only offensive miracle in the game is locked behind the Dragon God boss, so we have no choice but to use the talisman itself as a melee weapon. It's not that this is a particularly difficult fight, it's just that this boss has over 4,400 HP, and we're going to be doing a single digit of damage for each hit. I was mostly worried about the run to the boss with the talisman, but it ended up not being that bad with the Thieves' Ring and Soul Remains. I was able to lure the ghosts out of my way with the Soul Remains and even distract the last Reaper with it. I'll definitely keep this in mind for future runs. Despite being in body form, the Thieves' Ring seemed to work just as well against the old hero, and he never noticed my footsteps, even when I got close. Like I said, this isn't a difficult fight, but in these circumstances it can be very easy for me to lose my patience and get a bit overzealous with my punishes, so as you can see, I ended up depleting most of my healing items over the course of this 40-minute fight. But once that's finally done, we'll have a lot of souls to spend on levels, so why not get our endurance to 20 as well? Moving on to another archstone, it's time to spin again, so let's see what the wheel has in store this time. The wheel has chosen spears. Those aren't too hard to get. As a matter of fact, there's one right here in the first section of 1-2. I'm gonna put the winged spear to good use in 2-1, since the armor spider is weak to pierce damage. Even though I already unlocked the shortcut while farming earlier, I tried to rush through the tunnel again, in body form. I've died so much already that black phantom enemies are already starting to pop up. But there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. We'll get some extra souls from the boss now. I've got some more of that dubious goo, so we can do even more damage against this thing. It won't even be necessary to upgrade the spear. The pierce and magic damage combo will clear most of her HP before triggering the fire blast, and by then, it won't be a problem even if the buff runs out. After she's done spinning all those webs, we'll need to do some spinning as well, you know the drill. Katanas! Ooh, that's a fun one. Let's see what our choices are. Since I killed the Vanguard and all the bosses without dying in body form, the Shrine of Storms is already in pure white, so if I really wanted to, I could get the Makoto. And I do want to. I don't see why I wouldn't. It has good damage to start out with, and we don't need to worry about upgrading it. We can sneak up to the rock without alerting the invader if we wear the Thief's Ring, giving us plenty of time to equip it and test it out. Next, I'll fight the Flame Lurker for his soul to unlock Ed's services. While it is a magic sword, it doesn't do magic damage. If it did, we'd see even crazier damage against this guy, but the damage is still pretty decent, and a few slashes will quickly add up. Of course, we have to keep an eye on our health since it drains our own HP on hit, plus I have to watch my step in the arena and not step in any lava pools. I've started to adjust to his moveset with practice, but the issue with the visuals is much harder to adjust to. He literally starts burning with rage that begins to manifest on his own body. Is this why they say blind fury? Let's move on from that and claim whatever levels we can before spinning for the next weapon. This time we'll be using large hammers, or great hammers as the other games call them. The first thing we need to do is go back to 2-1 and pick up this great club at the end of the collapsing bridge of planks. The great club on its own doesn't seem too bad at first glance, but it can't be upgraded in this game, and it also only has an A scaling in strength. The meat cleaver we can make out of it, on the other hand, has S scaling in strength and dexterity. In addition to that, it has magic damage with its own separate scaling off of faith. There's also a gimmick where attacking will heal you slightly, which ended up turning into a tradition in Souls games. This weapon can't be upgraded either, but unless you plan to venture into New Game Plus, I don't see damage drop-off being an issue anytime soon. Such a weapon won't be obtained without heavy stat investment. After seeing how many souls I would need even after eating all my soul items, I went ahead and duped in order to reach 26 strength and 16 faith, in case I wanted to test the one-handed moveset. It does enough damage to get the overkill bonus against most enemies, and even though it's a slow weapon, I really enjoy the moveset. It also has a very generous hitbox and can take out groups of enemies in a single swing. The heavy chop is good for hitting small enemies like the plague rats. The healing effect is pretty weak, so I won't be able to outpace Leechmonger in self-healing like I hoped to. But what does it matter when the damage on my end nullifies its healing anyway? There's the one problem with duping. Getting a bunch of levels from bosses will be less common now. For our next weapon class, we have daggers. Earlier, I picked up the secret dagger from 3-1, so this works out pretty well. First, it'll need a few upgrades, then we might as well take it back to where it came from and go back to 3-1 to properly clear the level. Don't be fooled by its low attack rating. The secret dagger may not look as threatening as a greatsword, but it's certainly capable of dishing out similar amounts of damage. As should be the case for any assassin's weapon, it can take out stronger opponents with a sneaky backstab, but due to its high DPS, sneak attacks aren't even necessary to do the deed quickly. The lack of poise in this game helps out with that. The secret dagger and the thief's ring turned this level into a real prison break. It's fun to go full stealth mode and try to take out the guards as quietly as possible. We also steal a few useful items along the way. But the loot I'm particularly interested in is the fluted set on the first floor. While my opinion is that female characters have better armor when it comes to exclusive sets, male characters get my favorite version of the fluted set, which is honestly probably just my favorite set overall. They chose it as the poster armor for a reason. This time, I'll actually be able to wear most of the set since my weapon is so light. I finally faced my fears and made it past the trap on the first try. Perhaps my armor gave me the confidence to do so. It is the armor of the main character, after all. Before I fight the Fool's Idol, I go up the stairs for the Silver Catalyst, and with the Necromancer out of the picture, we can proceed with the fight. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary here. She doesn't have much health, so the Secret Dagger will be able to put out some decent damage against her. The two-handed combos are slightly slower than the one-handed ones, but I think using it two-handed still did more damage in a single stamina bar overall. Regardless, I enjoy the one-handed moveset as well, and utilize the quick slashes not only against the Fool's Idol, but to quickly deal with any prisoners trying to get in my way. With that, it's time to consult the wheel for our next weapon. The wheel has chosen, and it has chosen large axes. The Great Axe certainly fits that description, so we'll pick that up, equip it, and use it to clear out some of the bear bugs. Of course, the damage isn't going to be great when it's unupgraded, but that's what we're here for. Once we make our way to the lower level, we can buy some large hardstone shards from the Filthy Man. It got pretty annoying to go back and forth between his locations to get upgrade materials, and if I'm gonna dupe souls, why not just dupe the upgrade materials as well? It's not like they can't be farmed at this point, it's just more tedious than it's worth. Plus 9 is satisfactory for me. That last upgrade isn't going to matter much since we'll still be able to kill virtually anything in World 3 in 2 hits or less. Normally I'm a little scared going up these steps, but a Great Axe will quickly turn all your enemies to dust, leaving me self-assured enough to challenge the Man-Eaters with the Rat Ring active. Sadly, my puny form of flesh can't compare to the sturdy metal axe. After that, I realized I didn't need an extra damage boost, but rather just needed to trust in my simple axe to do the job all on its own. From here, we'll go ahead and spin again before proceeding with the next boss. This time, our weapon class will be straight swords. For this, I went to the Dregling Merchant to buy the broadsword. While this weapon returns in all the other games, the Demon Souls version of the weapon is unique in the sense that this is the only game where it inflicts bleed. I guess that makes sense. Slashing weapons are generally associated with bleed in the Souls games. The animation is a bit awkward, but I still really like the one-handed R2 attack it has in Demon Souls. You can do some good damage with the initial lunge, but it also has a follow-up attack that can be pretty useful if you're dealing with tankier enemies, like this knight here. I decided to take the broadsword all the way up the bridge and go ahead and kill the Tower Knight. Since I'm coming back here a little late, I didn't bother to upgrade it. I didn't feel the need to clear out the archers this time around. Plus, I do have the Thief's Ring, so I'm not even sure that all of them can see me. As for the Tower Knight, we're strong enough to withstand his attacks, though I spent most of the fight on the ground. But when you get knocked down, you dust yourself off and stand back up, right? I did that, but when the Tower Knight did the same post-mortem, I got a little freaked out. For the next spin, it looks like we finally landed on something capable of taking out the Storm King, that being bows. Let's just go through the motions, shall we? We'll pick up the compound longbow, upgrade it, slay the red dragon because why not now that we have a bow, then we'll make our way to the final level of the Shrine of Storms. There's never much to say about this fight, since this fight never really changes, but at the very least, I'll still pick up the Storm Ruler so we have it as an option. This fight always gives you a lot of souls since you also have to kill all the manta rays, and including the additional 10k I got from the Dragon Soul, I was able to get 4 whole levels out of it. Well, 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 speak of the devil, the very next thing the wheel lands on is large swords, and the Storm Ruler just so happens to fall under that category. It scales with nothing, it can't be upgraded, and it only has 10 durability points. That doesn't sound great at all. So why did I want to use this thing? Your guess is as good as mine. I suppose I just like trying weird and unconventional things in these games, like using the Storm Ruler outside of its domain. Obviously, I packed some grindstones to repair it on the go, but even so, I need to check up on the durability constantly. Even just fighting a single group of enemies will quickly wear down the sword's durability. Bulatarian Palace is filled with all kinds of traps to avoid dirtying our own hands, plus there are plenty of twists and turns in these narrow tunnels that help us lose the aggro of unnecessary targets. Of course, sooner or later we'll have to engage in confrontation with how heavily patrolled the castle is, and I must say, I expected this sword to do a lot worse than it did. I mean, sure, the damage would be low if we're comparing it to any other greatsword, but it's really not that much of a hindrance if you know what you're doing. Plus, in an attempt to make up for the rest of its shortcomings, it knocks down all enemies on hit, which is typically something that only an ultra greatsword could do. While I was using this, I learned something new. Before, I always assumed that when you get the "weapon broke" message, it means that your weapon broke. How presumptuous of me, I know. I checked my weapon to be sure, and apparently that's just this game's way of saying that your weapon is at risk. At least now that I know that, I don't have to check up on my weapon as often. So with that newfound knowledge, I can happily clear out the rest of the level since I have a few grindstones to spare for repairs. I went to search for that other official who I knocked off the ledge earlier. There are only a few places he could go since the shortcut wasn't open yet. Through process of elimination, I figured he must have wandered off into this tunnel with the Imperial spy. I didn't expect that he'd make it all the way down, so I got a pleasant little surprise when I turned this corner. I also got a flamberge, which is a pretty rare drop. That figures that the game only gives you a weapon you don't need as an instant drop. Once we finally catch up with that last fat official, the Penetrator will do us the honors on the final one. I didn't expect the Storm Ruler to work the same way against a boss, but it actually does. You can stagger him for as long as your stamina allows. There are a few attacks that you can't interrupt once the animation starts though. I figured this out earlier when one of the fat officials blasted me in the face with a fireball. Another thing I learned is that it seems like only the regular R1 attack has the knockdown effect. If you try to do it out of a roll with no stamina left expecting to get a free knockdown, prepare to be punished for it. This is unrelated to the fight, but while I circled around him, I noticed that the Penetrator has long silver hair. I don't know how it took me this long to see it. Before, I always mistook it for a tassel. It makes sense if you think about the story though. That's right, I'm all caught up with the lore now. I've been rereading all those item descriptions and listening to NPC dialogue again. Ostrava tells us a little about the king's brave knights, one of them named Metis, better known as the Penetrator. I think the long, flowing hair protruding through the helmet contributes to that idolized image of a gallant knight to defend Boletaria, especially when combined with how clean his armor is. A truly perfect knight in shining armor, the same idea which has ironically become this demon. If you remember one of my earlier Demon Souls videos, I mistook the real Penetrator, the phantom who wields his sword, for some random guy, and I think that represents the exact message they were trying to get across. Just think about it. The true knight is simply another NPC default character like you. Something so mundane that the uninitiated could mistake him for just another random NPC. And while it could always be that they didn't have the resources to make unique models for everyone, I'd like to believe it was at least partially intentional. What I'm getting at is that the idea behind it was certainly intentional. These three regular humans, juxtaposed with towering demons who take on almost godlike forms. Okay, that's enough with ranting about the story. All this rambling just because I noticed his hair. But anyways, the fight itself went well. My sword actually didn't break during the fight, which was nice. I've certainly had to pace myself with this one with below average damage, but this fight is always enjoyable to me, so I had no problems with that. Let's see what the wheel will decide for us next. Crossbows. I'm fine with that. I always appreciate the chance to try out something different. I'll reclaim that heavy crossbow that's been collecting dust in storage, then head to the once royal mistress to buy some black bolts. Like the other games, crossbows in Demon Souls don't scale with any stats, besides the gargoyle crossbow, but even then it's not really anything significant. That wouldn't be a big deal on its own, but you also can't upgrade crossbows in this game, so you're stuck with that terrible base damage. I'm sure this would be fine if you're using a crossbow when you're offhand as a backup weapon, but as a primary weapon, I just don't see any reason why you would choose it over a bow. It is stylish and fun to use, but if you're looking to do damage, you'll have to look elsewhere. At first, I thought buying 200 bolts was overkill, but it turns out I vastly underestimated the amount of bolts I would need. I brought the crossbow here because I was hoping for a fun adventure through the swamp as an arbalister, but my lighthearted journey quickly turned into a battle for survival, with the weakest of enemies still taking 3 to 4 bolts to kill. Even so, I still craved the thrill of battle, and foolishly challenged the Cleaver Phantom in her own territory. She knows this swamp well and can roll in it just fine, but as for me, my mobility is limited, so I have to try my best to stay on the island, or I'll be flattened into the mud in no time. She also will occasionally do the really scary roll attack that the meat cleaver has. The range is deceptively large and can hit you even at mid-range. With a crossbow, I need to play more defensively, rather than being too trigger-happy. To mitigate the damage problem, I'll first let the poison do its work until my health falls into range of the rat ring. While I'm doing that, I'll keep the thief's ring on so she won't see me during the setup process. By the time she comes back, we'll be on the opposite side of the island and get to take the first shot. After that, I have to be very careful and only attack when I've re-established my distance from her. I don't mind if she dodges some bolts, at least then she'll be occupied with an action, so I get another chance to hit her for free. Once we've taken down the Phantom of the Swamp, we can start heading back towards the main path. I thought crossbows would be good for sniping the giant depraved ones on the island here. Without the ability to aim, most of my bolts won't reach. Hey, I don't want to leave without saying at least one nice thing about the crossbow though. What I can say is that it never misses its mark when it comes to mosquitoes, which you can't say about most melee weapons. I know damage isn't looking good, but still, the Dirty Colossus is weak and shouldn't be much of an issue. I couldn't have foreseen that this of all things would make me have to use my bolts wisely. If I hadn't fluctuated in and out of rat ring range, I wouldn't have had enough for the fight. I've never had a fight against the Dirty Colossus last so long. It took just under 10 minutes and forced me to actually use my head for once. That's definitely not a bad thing. Usually you can just press R1 without even looking at the screen before it even has a chance to do much of anything. I wouldn't say it was necessarily difficult, it just, well, felt like a fight for once. And surprisingly, when I actually got to see a little more from the boss, I found that it wasn't even tedious. I actually had a lot of fun against it with the crossbow and learned a few things about it. For a while, I was confused as to why my bolts weren't doing any damage. At first I thought maybe it was the casing around the boss, but then I noticed that each time it shoots out the flies, they act as a temporary barrier for projectiles, and if you look closely, you can see where the bolts landed on top of the swarm. So like I said, I have to actually think about what I'm doing and constantly change positions. I can't just pop in and out from behind the torch and call it a day. As always, the enemy AI is kinda janky in this game, so sometimes Dirty Colossus will still get trapped in a loop for a while before remembering how to attack. We finished the fight with 14 bolts to spare, and now we can finally discard our crossbow and see what the wheel lands on next. The next spin is curved swords, so I have a good idea of what I want to do next. Turn around and go directly right from the Dirty Colossus fog gate. Here, we can pick up the Shotel. We'll make a quick stop at the Nexus to get 16 dexterity, then, once it's sufficiently upgraded, we're going back to the Valley of Defilement to challenge Garl Vinland. Now you know why I chose the Shotel in particular. It has a special shield evading property that will cancel out 50% of an enemy shield's damage reduction, and while risky, it will work against our pal Garl Vinland here, who loves to hold his shield up at all times. I have a lot of health this time around, so I decided to mindlessly swing in his face for a bit until I got parried. As long as I have around 90% of my health or so, I'll survive his parry. But still, that doesn't mean I get to spam R1 against him. But if I were to spam R1, hypothetically, I'd at least apply Black Turpentine first. I was able to get around him for a backstab, then blocked his path to Astraea so he couldn't heal. He was so set on getting me out of his way that he let his guard down. This time, I didn't even have to parry him. I'm sorry, Estrella, but I still need to collect your soul. Well, let's see what the wheel has for us this time. Very large swords. In that case, we only have one option right now. There's only 2 of those in the whole game, and the other one is the Dragon Bone Smasher, which I can't get since I screwed up the World Tendency in Stonefang. The Great Sword is still a good choice though. Like every Souls game, the Great Sword is not a Great Sword, but an Ultra Great Sword, or Very Large Sword as it's called in this game. I'll take it to the Nexus to upgrade it a little, then use the rest of my souls to get more endurance so I can put on some more armor while wielding it. I don't need to upgrade it much since I'm just going to bully the old monk with it. Why worry about damage when we can just smack him from one side of the room to the other? I let him get a few hits on me to be nice, and even switched to the one-handed moveset just so he wouldn't feel so oppressed. Unfortunately, he just can't compete with a greatsword. Besides the damage, I also can use it to block his attacks while circling around him to punish. I wanted a backstab, but for some reason couldn't get one to come out this time. Once I finally had him cornered, he tried to go for a parry to turn the tide, but was just a little too early. Still, his bravery is commendable. With only 3 things left on the wheel, it now comes down to which weapon class I'm willing to waste on the Dragon God before I head to the final boss. But then again, it's not like I have much of a choice, so I got out that crushing battle axe I picked up in 2-1 and went to work. An axe shouldn't take too long to break the debris, but I decided to push my luck and make a mad dash for the ballista, and you can see how that ended up for me. I thought I'd be safe with the Thief's Ring, but it seems like he always spots me behind this pillar when he's angry. I did the same thing here. I thought it would be fine if I quickly took cover after breaking the debris, but I think at this point it would be better to just keep running since he's already locked onto me regardless. Once we're done with all the gimmicks, the actual fight is done in a matter of seconds, and from here, I'll get some levels into magic, seeing as I still haven't rolled catalysts yet. And speaking of which, I guess this next roll will be the last one of the run, and it is Thrusting Swords. In this game, the class is called Rapiers, but I just went with the title that the wiki used for consistency. I've been wanting to try out this Mercury Rapier I got from the Tower of Latria. King Allant isn't immune to poison, but his resistance is very high, so having lower physical damage in return for a higher rate of poison buildup might work in our favor here. I could only upgrade it to +3 with the materials I had on me, and I was going to farm for some more Mercury Stone, but in the process of doing that, I actually got a Spiral Rapier as a random drop from a gargoyle, which caused me to change my plans. It seems like some divine entity really wants me to use the Spiral Rapier, so I can't simply ignore the sign it gave me. However, I'll still be using the Mercury Rapier alongside this one. With that one, we can hopefully get some poison started, then switch to the Spiral Rapier as our main source of damage. Also, for what it's worth, he's not immune to bleed damage either, and the Spiral Rapier does have bleed buildup. Before we leave, we'll spend some of our souls getting one last level into Endurance, and whatever we have left over, we'll give to Patches in exchange for some of his special grass. We'll push our way through whatever enemies try to block our path, roll into them to make them move by force if you have to. My timing with the Dragon Bridge is still a little off, but thankfully, this time I have enough health to survive the fire if I get caught, just in case I die to Allant and have to come back. So the physical damage of the Mercury Rapier is a lot less than I anticipated, but hey, maybe we'll get some poison going early on to offset this. Apparently I just couldn't wait and tried to force some openings to poison him, and, deservedly, I got caught by Soulsucker. You can take my luck. No, please, take it. I really don't want it. I got tired of waiting for poison that likely will never come and decided to swap to the Spiral Rapier a little earlier than planned. Naturally, the damage was much better since it's almost fully upgraded, which didn't really help me because all it did was make me take even more unnecessary risks just to get in a few staggers. That AoE is very dangerous from afar, but up close, it's very easy to interrupt, especially if said interruption is caused by his demise. Out of curiosity, I looked at my stats to see what he took, and it turns out all it was that single point of endurance I'd just gotten earlier. If you rewatch the footage, you can see my stamina bar shrink, but if you aren't looking for it, it's hard to catch in the heat of battle. There's no need to spin, since we know that the only weapon class left is catalysts. MP won't matter against the true final boss, so I'll prioritize damage and turn the wooden catalyst into the insanity catalyst. I know I can't wield it, but I can just dupe some souls to level up one last time before we go below. Oh, right. Well, the silver catalyst it is. All I have is soul arrow. I'm not sure I'll be able to make it this time. Okay, Alant, put me into rat ring range. You just crack me up, you know that? Dude, just hit me. He's never needed help hitting me before, he's just being difficult. Don't you miss the days of spells not using stamina? Right, so now you remember how to face my direction. And that about does it for this run. It was simple and lighthearted, but still lots of fun. Demon Souls is just a simple game, but even so, there's still plenty of opportunities to play the game in ways you haven't before. I especially liked the portions of the run where things didn't go as expected, like Dirty Colossus for example. There are always more ways to make the game at least a little more challenging. If you enjoy challenges like this one, you can check out the Dark Souls 3 version I've already done, and look forward to more installments of the random weapon class run in other games. You can also check out my channel for all kinds of themed runs for Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and Elden Ring. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I encourage you to try the run out for yourself.